to other Rebecca.
My name is Deborah.
Hey guys, it's Camera Review for Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, Season 4, Episode 11. I'm almost over you, and holy shit, this episode. I mean, look, I have really been loving this season, more than 2 and 3, honestly. Like I've said before, I think this really does have the potential to possibly be as good as Season 1. But from what we got with this episode, I mean, I was not at all expecting to get what we did here. But this episode in general, it is a prime example of why I love this show as much as I do. I mean, there are rarely shows that have this risky storytelling and are going this uncharted territory like they did here, and I think it's one of the best episodes this show has ever done. There's so much to love about this episode. There's so much to dissect. This is probably going to be the longest review I do for this entire season because there's just a lot to talk about here, so we'll just get into it. Now, before we get into all this crazy stuff in this episode, you know, with Nathaniel, because obviously he is the star of this entire episode, I do quickly want to touch upon Rebecca and Greg. I actually like the way this was done. They could have easily just not focused on them in the story, not have anything go on with Rebecca, but it makes sense to start with Rebecca because we expect it to. We expect for this episode to revolve around Rebecca because she is the main character of this show. We expect for a lot to go on there. I like the scene where they're talking about how even though they enjoyed, you know, having sex with Daryl's and opening up to each other and things like that, they want to take things a little bit slower. You know, obviously Greg is still in recovery. They're still trying to figure things out. So I like that they are taking things slower. And I thought that was a good moment, showing that you can still do stuff with Rebecca, even if she isn't a main part of this episode. And I did like what we got there between the two of them. I'm excited to see where their storyline does go moving forward. And then, of course, at the end of the episode as well, we do get that scene where before they said they didn't want to kiss in public, they didn't want to put labels on anything, but at the end they actually do take that step forward, and it seems like they are going to be a legitimate couple, and I'm excited to see where that ends up going. I really did love what we got with these two in this episode. Again, it was very small, but it's one of those things where it is small, but it is a big step forward for them. And it was enough there to still satisfy me. Even if there were only like 2 scenes with Rebecca and Greg, I still felt satisfied by them overall. And I'm glad that the show still started out with them here. However, like I already touched upon, this is Nathaniel's episode through and through, and honestly, considering the way that last week's episode ended, I should have expected this. I mean, last week's episode, we saw that Nathaniel, he was going to open up to Rebecca, but then he saw that Rebecca and Greg are together, he heard about what Rebecca was saying, or how she hasn't really felt this way before, and you can tell that he is, you know, reasonably heartbroken over it. But I was not expecting an entire episode to focus on him, but thank God it did, because this is probably the best we've ever seen Nathaniel. He's never been a better character than he is in this episode. The entire episode, he's just feeling a lot of resentment towards Greg. He, you know, he knows the bond that they had, and he's upset that he was able to get Rebecca first. He really thought he had a shot with her, and unfortunately, it didn't work out. And I know a lot of people are a bit upset with the way they've been handling it, but it makes sense that Rebecca's not with Greg and she's not with Nathaniel because there's more bad blood between Nathaniel and Rebecca. There's more stuff there. With Greg, you know, sure, there was a lot of bad blood, but he's very much moved past it. Nathaniel, on the other hand, she does, you know, all she feels with Nathaniel is that's who she was with when she was scheming against Josh, and that's the whole reason that they started, you know, feeling that attraction towards each other. And I think for Rebecca, I think it just makes more sense for her to be with someone like Greg. He's just a bit more of a sensible choice, and you can understand that for sure. But like I said, throughout the whole episode, he's feeling this resentment. But then you also have Maya, who also is the co-star of this episode, which I was very surprised about. But she's also been eyeing this girl named Joanne. They apparently went out for 2 weeks, and she has just completely ghosted her. She's gone to some other girl named Marcy, and she is very similar to Nathaniel, where she's just looking at them in jealousy, but also just thinking about what could have been. And they realize how similar both of their situations are, and he goes to George, and basically they're talking, he's talking to Paula, and through talking to him, he discovers that he's never seen a romantic comedy before, which they encourage are actually Rebecca's favorite kind of movies. So Nathaniel decides to, he takes this to heart. He watches a bunch of romantic comedies. However, in a very clever writing, we realize that he doesn't finish them. He only watches the first half of them, and, in every film, it always seems to work out for both characters. The guy always getting the girl, or vice versa. And again, he doesn't realize how this is actually going to turn out. And the rest of this episode is basically played out exactly like that. It's a romantic comedy, and it's a huge nod to one of the best episodes that I think Crazy Ex-Girlfriend has done, that of course being Josh's ex-girlfriend is crazy. And while that whole episode used horror movies as a way to, show the situation between Rebecca and, Josh at the time, this episode uses it as a way to show the fantasy that Nathaniel has in his head, that he is going to somehow win back Rebecca, and somehow he's going to use Maya as a way to lure Rebecca back. He's going to use Maya as a way to make Rebecca jealous. But of course, that's not how a lot of romantic comedies work. And again, it's very well written because, as we know, Nathaniel's only seen the first half of a romantic comedy. So he's so convinced that this is actually going to work out. And there was so much to love about this. I mean, I love that in this world, Nathaniel is a lot nerdier. He literally has George as like his sidekick throughout all this, which, don't worry, we'll get to the jokes later. I mean, I usually have a whole segment where I talk about the jokes, but there are so many in this episode that I will get into, because there's some all-timers in this episode for sure. But, of course, in this version, we have Maya, who is way more assertive than she is in than the Maya that we know, which, that right away just tells you that there's something different going on. I mean, Nathaniel's look, it didn't tell you that. Maya acting the way she did absolutely should have told you that. But basically, they devised this scheme where they're going to try to, win back Rebecca, and she's going to try to win back Joanne. And, he thinks he knows the scheme. He always, Nathaniel always knows that there is some sort of big event as well. And the big event is that Greg is, like, reopening this restaurant. It's going to lead to this grand gesture where he makes some sort of announcement to Rebecca. And, basically, we see in this world, going back to Rebecca and Greg, Rebecca is someone who has a lot more lighter hair. She looks unnaturally beautiful. Greg is way more of a douche in this. He is very controlling. He constantly is interfering with anything that has to do between her and Nathaniel, and it was just a lot of fun to see. You can tell they had a lot of fun with this episode, but again, they're not just doing this to do it. Like, a lot of shows would just do this and you think it's a filler episode, but no, the reason that this episode is so well done is because all of this does have a point. All the stuff we're seeing here, even ridiculous stuff like the way Maya and Nathaniel end up meeting in this episode, them literally running into each other and him having to pick her stuff up, or them going to a karaoke party. It's showing that you think you know how this is going to go. He thinks this is going to work. He has convinced himself that it's going to work, and as we know, it doesn't really turn out that way. Because pretty much right from this karaoke number and on, these two clearly are gaining attraction for each other. This is especially shown in a scene with George where he's concerned after Maya ends up leaving this project that they were supposed to work on together. So you can tell these two are very quickly starting to care about each other. But what ends up happening is once they do decide to work on this project together, they both have two grand gestures they're doing, because Maya realizes that Joanne has actually been chosen as, like, the client for, like, the big case, so she's going to address the case, and then Nathaniel's going to go to Greg's, like, reopening of the restaurant. It ends up working out really well for Maya. She does end up back with Joanne, but right when Nathaniel goes back to Rebecca, he realizes that, and in typical romantic comedy fashion, Rebecca is not the one that he really loves. It is, of course, actually Maya, and that's when this episode really gets incredible. I mean, the rest of the episode was fantastic. There's so much to love, and again, I'll get more into that when we get to the laughs and things like that. But the way this episode ends is just so beautiful. The way it ends where he's talking to Maya, and you think that it's supposed to be like, it's going to continue the hilarity where it's making fun of him confessing his love for her, but it actually comes across quite genuine. And then there's that moment where Maya suddenly starts to bring up things that they haven't been through. In fact, it's things that him and Rebecca have been through, and then we realize what's going on. Nathaniel is using all of this as a way to really he's doing this as a way to really assess how he should handle things with Rebecca, and he eventually comes to that very sad conclusion that despite the fact that he truly does love Rebecca and he truly does care about her, that he unfortunately does have to let her go, and that, he should let her be happy with Greg because she's clearly moved past him. Her and Greg seem to have a really good relationship together, and there's no reason for him to really interfere because the real Greg is not like the one here. He's not douchey. He's not vindictive. He's not controlling. He is way more genuine. He really does care about Rebecca. He really is trying to get better. The two of them really are showing the best versions of themselves, and it's a great moment for Nathaniel. Again, just thinking about the Nathaniel that we saw when he was first introduced, and he was just this douchey guy who was just constantly, like, barking orders at people and firing George and things like that, and you saw him as someone who was just this corporate piece of shit, and to see where he's gone now, I mean, it's hard to forget a time when Nathaniel was not an integral part of this show, especially when you watch this episode. It seems like he's always been a major part of this show, and I think he always has been. I think even when Nathaniel wasn't a character on the show, I think his whole, characterization has always been a part of the show. The honesty that he really does have, the fear to become serious, the fear of being nice because it's just easier to be mean. These are all things that Rebecca perfectly exemplified at one point. She always knew that she could have been genuine with Josh, but it was just easier to it was just easier to continue to manipulate his life so she can find ways where she ended up with him. I think she always knew that she didn't care as much about Josh, but she always needed that goal in her life. And again, all of this really does apply to Nathaniel very well, and in that sense, Rebecca is still a major part of this episode, and I think they did an incredible job with that. And then, of course, there's that final scene, which honestly had me near tears. I mean, the one scene that got me the most is when that pizza guy comes and we finally flash back to reality, and we realize that, we see Nathaniel, he goes over to the pizza guy, he starts, like, crying on his shoulder. That whole scene was just, that honestly really did get me, because you're realizing two things. One, Nathaniel has really done a lot of growth over this, through this whole fantasy he's been in. He's had a lot of growth since then, but he also has finally come to that realization that it's not going to work out for him and Rebecca. And we know why he loves Rebecca, because nobody has cared about him as much as that pair has. It all really does stem back to what he told Heather in episode 6, where the two of them had a very genuine connection, and him and Rebecca had a very genuine connection, and he doesn't know if he'll ever be able to have that again. And him confiding in someone as meaningless as a pizza guy was just really heartbreaking to watch, and I really loved everything about that scene. But then, of course, we get the scene between him and Rebecca where he just tells her that he's okay that he has to let her go. It's okay that she is with Greg. He's actually not upset about it because he's been able to move past it. And obviously, Rebecca's shocked about this. This is not at all what she expected to hear from Nathaniel, but you can see that she welcomes this with open arms. She likes the fact that he told her what's going on, and I think the two of them, they are going to have a genuine friendship moving forward. I think the two of them, this is actually going to help rather than hurt their relationship, and I love the moment where he is, walking away from her, and of course Greg comes back, and then there is that little hint that maybe something can happen between him and Maya. However, I don't think the show's trying to say that him and Maya are going to end up together at the end of the show. I mean, we saw how Maya reacted. That's not a reaction of someone who's attracted. That's someone who is, you know, who is a little bit put off by Nathaniel. I don't really think she views Nathaniel as that at all. Maybe as a friend, but I do not think that Maya views Nathaniel in a romantic way. And I don't think that's what the show is trying to say. I think what the show is trying to say is that there are other fish in the sea for Nathaniel, even if he doesn't believe that there are. There are people like Maya out there that can be very sweet and genuine, and maybe they don't have, you know, the looks that Rebecca does. Maybe they don't have the warmth that Rebecca does, but they do have that heart that she does. They do have that love that Nathaniel really wants in his life, and I think it really does show how far his character has come. I've really never cared about Nathaniel more than I have at this very moment, and I'm so happy we got this episode in that sense, because, again, it's something where I continue to talk about, I know, but if this season was not 18 episodes, there is no way we could have gotten an episode like this, and thank God we did, because it just showed how much great work they've been doing with Nathaniel, and really him finally moving forward and taking this big step, and realizing that he doesn't need to just continue to meddle into Rebecca's life. Again, echoing to how Rebecca did in, you know, to Josh. In fact, I love the moment where Rebecca actually understands what Nathaniel has been through, where he talks about how he was watching a bunch of romantic comedies and was picturing his life as one, because Rebecca, she's done the same thing, but as a horror movie, so she knows, like, what Nathaniel's been through, and all of that just combined with the stuff we got here, it's everything that I could have wanted, and I could not be more satisfied, when it comes down to the way this was played out here. But now I want to get into the thing that, you know, all the emotional stuff aside, I want to get into the jokes for this episode, because holy shit. I mean, like I said, these are some of the all-timers throughout the entire show. I mean, right from the get-go, when we enter Mountaintop and Bert has that, like, Devil Wears Prada entrance, that right off the bat had me dying. I love the way that was done. I love that he was someone who was much more assertive and direct. They were trying to make fun of, like, you know, a la Miranda Priestley in Devil Wears Prada. All of that was great, and I love the way that whole entrance was done. Michael Hitchcock just killed it in this episode, and he hasn't been in the show a lot. Again, they really did do a good job of focusing on the more ancillary characters, and I think that was definitely really great to see. However, for me, in terms of laughs, the three MVPs in terms of laughs in this episode were George, Maya, and Paula. All three of them, I thought, had some of the best stuff throughout the episode. With George, I love how different he was here. I love that he was just someone who would constantly just relate what was going on to sports. Like, they'd be having a conversation about Maya, and they'd just be like, football, yeah, football, you gotta watch football. Like, that is so not like George, and I just love that. I mean, I don't know the actor's name that plays George, but he absolutely just dominated this episode for me. I love the stuff we got with him. It was absolutely hilarious, and just him wearing that jersey constantly, it's just great. I loved how that was thought out. Also, like I already touched upon with Maya, her being extremely assertive to Nathaniel and calling out, like, him, like, invading her privacy and doing things without her consent. I mean, yeah, we see it on romantic comedies all the time. There's so many films where they're trying to have, like, the strong heroine that stands up for herself, and I like that the show was trying to make a nod at that, because, sure, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend has some very strong, like, female characters in that sense, but they're not like Maya, and Maya in real life, is, you know, in the show, is not like that. She's much more timid and soft-spoken and things like that, and I loved seeing this more assertive version of Maya, which was just hilarious to watch. And aside from that, I mean, Maya had so much great stuff. The funniest line from her, though, at least for me, is when they're getting the makeovers, and we have that really over-the-top scene where the both of them, they come out and they've gotten makeovers, and everyone has these ridiculous reactions. Maya's response to why she ditched the glasses and that she doesn't even need them, and that not only that, but she wears them to pay tribute to Velma from Scooby-Doo. Again, it's one of those things that is so ridiculous and so dumb, but this show just nails it. The satire was just so brilliant in this episode. And then, of course, we circle back to Paula, Paula's stuff was also fantastic. I love that Paula was just this hyper overstressed worker who is just constantly focused on this project. We got to get this project done. It's the most important thing of our entire lives. But then the ending of the episode, where after the project is done, Paula has that moment where she's like, what is my purpose in life? You know, why have I done this? I have nothing left to live for. I mean, all of that was great. Donna and Champlin just killed it in that moment, and I do think it's one of the funniest moments I've ever seen from Paula. Paula is always someone who has a lot of really fun moments, but this was on another level for me, and I loved everything we got there. That was absolutely hilarious. The background music throughout this episode was great. I loved the moment where Maya and Nathaniel, they're talking about the like very traumatic things that happened to them in their past. I think Maya brought up how like her mother died or something like that, and then they start bonding over the tissues. I mean, if you've seen any romantic comedy, there is always a scene like that where it just gets weirdly serious, and I love that the show made a nod to that. And you know, also the whole stuff with the entirety of gratuitous karaoke moment, but I'll get more to that when we get to the music. I thought all of that was great. I mean, there's so many great moments in this episode in terms of comedy. The constant just explaining all the plot conveniences. I love the moment where they forgot about the reopening and then Maya just like randomly brought it back up. Stuff like that is just so clever. And with all of these moments, you could have thought that maybe they were trying to make fun of romantic comedies, but I actually saw them as paying tribute because Aline, Brosh, McKenna actually has written 27 Dresses and things like that, so she is actually very well versed when it comes to romantic comedies. And while they definitely were, you know, making fun of them, they also were trying to just pay tribute to the certain tropes that you see in romantic comedies, and I thought that was honestly really funny. I love the way all that stuff was done. Also, Jim and Tim's characterization in this episode I also loved. I loved that Tim was just constantly getting calls from his father, and he was just crying about it constantly, and then Jim just being the one to just like come in and like state things. Absolutely hilarious. There's always characters like that in movies like this, and I loved everything about that. So many hilarious moments throughout this. I could honestly do a whole video just dissecting every single hilarious moment in Crazy X in this episode because they really were all-timers, but the comedy is always a standout, but in this episode especially, I mean, every joke just hit like bullseye. There was rarely a joke in this episode where I wasn't laughing hysterically. I don't even recall really like chuckling. I laughed hysterically at basically everything that was going on because it was all so clever. It was all so well implemented into the story, and if there was any time to just showcase how great Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is at humor, it is this episode. If someone wants to see how funny this show is, it is this episode to show them because they're just some of the funniest stuff I have ever seen from the show in this episode. And then finally, I do want to touch upon the musical number in this episode because, again, because this wasn't a typical episode of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, there wasn't a lot going on in terms of music. The background music was very different. The camera moved very differently. We didn't even get the intro in this episode, which maybe I would have liked to see like a Meet Nathaniel thing, but honestly, I like that because it was showing that this was a whole different type of show altogether. This was Nathaniel's episode through and through, down to the fact that we didn't even have that intro, which I thought was actually really cool. We did get one song, though, and that is, I think, an all-timer. Gratuitous karaoke moments is everything that I love about the show. Similar to the episode, it was so self-aware, but it also was extremely catchy, and it was the moment where you start seeing Nathaniel and Maya really starting to fall in love with each other and starting to have this attraction towards each other, and I thought that was just such a great moment. I loved the way they started off the song not being able to sing very well, and then the crowd started to get into it. I mean, again, if you've seen any romantic comedy, a karaoke scene is always in there. I actually went on YouTube after I watched them, like, watched a bunch of karaoke scenes just to see, like, how accurate it was, and they really did a great job, I think, of capturing everything. The mannerisms, the certain ways the crowds react, their reactions after the song. I mean, all of it was so spot on, and you can just tell this is just a great example of such amazing writers on display. I mean, these guys really, I think, did a great time of dissecting every trope in a romantic comedy possible, implementing it into just a 40-minute episode, and if that doesn't show just how amazing the staff and the team is at Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, I really don't know what else does, because that song alone should just show how much tireless effort they put into this episode. Overall, I can't really go on about this episode enough. This is everything that I love in a Crazy Ex-Girlfriend episode. It was so hilarious, but it was also extremely insightful, and it was just such a great hour that showcased how great of an actor Scott Michael Foster is, who I cannot wait to see what he's going to do next, honestly. Like, after this episode, I want to see him starring in something. I know he's done other shows, but, like, this is really the first thing that I've really recognized him in, and after this show, I want to see him do something really big after this, because I think he definitely has been very understated. I don't hear enough people talk about how great he is in the show, but this episode really did show us that. And also Esther Povitsky, I know she has Alone Together on Freeform, and I definitely do want to check that out after this, because I think both of them are so talented. They both just completely carry this entire episode. It was a fantastic moment for Nathaniel. And unfortunately, I know this is sad, but it does start to move us closer to the end game here. We start to realize that things are in fact wrapping up. A lot of these character storylines are starting to go to its endpoint, and you know, I don't think this is the last we see Nathaniel. I think the storyline now is going to be Nathaniel trying to move past Rebecca and him trying to, you know, gain love outside of her, maybe find his Maya in the world. Again, I don't think him and Maya are going to end up together. I don't think that's what the show is saying. I think there's someone out there for Nathaniel, though, and I do think we are going to see that. And I don't think it's going to be someone like, say, a Mona, who he clearly was only with just because he couldn't be with Rebecca. I think he is going to find a legit relationship, and I'll be surprised if the show does not end that way. I think it is going to end with him finding love, and I'm excited to see the way things do work out there. But again, I can't praise this enough. Just between the hilarity, just the effort that was put into this episode, the costumes were so on point here, the way the characters acted. I mean, the acting, this episode alone just shows how great of actors everyone is here, because they had to play such different versions of themselves. That was so well done. But it really was that realization that Nathaniel had, especially with that pizza guy, that really did bring this episode forward as an all-timer for me. This is everything I love about the show. It is as good as an episode could get. It was a great nod to Josh's Ex-Girlfriend is Crazy, but it was a much smaller type of episode than that. That was a huge, you know, riveting episode for Rebecca that really did move forward every single storyline we had. This episode wasn't like that. It was a much more personal episode for Nathaniel, where he realized the choice that he had to make. He realized the fatal errors that he's made, and it just really was a great introspective look at Nathaniel Plimpton overall. It showed us how great of a character he is. It really was also a great episode for Maya as well. There's just so much to love about this episode. I think I've gone on about it long enough. If you guys can't tell, this is one of the best episodes I truly do think the show has ever done. I do think that, you know, this season being the way it is, if there was any season that could top this episode, I think it's this season. I think definitely that can happen. But for right now, I'm just going to say this is the best episode of this entire season, without any doubt. And for all those reasons and more, I am absolutely going to give Crazy Ex-Girlfriend Season 4, Episode 11, I'm Almost Over You, an A+. Seriously, guys, episodes like this just continue to astound me how underseen this show really is. I made a bunch of, like, Twitter posts and things like that after this show, and I really have not felt this great about the show than I have actually since Josh's Ex-Girlfriend is Crazy in Season 3. And like I said, this episode did echo a lot of similarities there. But again, it really did show that you don't need, you know, Rachel Bloom to be front and center. You still can have a fantastic show either way, and I think they very much did show that here. And it's an episode that I really do want to go back and watch, because it's one that you can definitely, it's very rewatchable in that sense. I think there's a lot of things that you'll go back and watch, and you'll realize that there's a lot of details that you might have missed. But either way, guys, in my review of this episode, I know I keep rambling on and on, but hey, when I love something, I gotta gush about it, okay? I'm sure you guys have had that same feeling. This is one of those cases where I just feel the need to consistently gush about something I love. But that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you guys in my next video. We only have 7 episodes left of this season, which is just very sad to say, but unfortunately that is the case. But I will see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.
Camera work gets better as we get into the swing. if it's at all necessary that we sing in this gratuitous